For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council ruled with absolute authority. They decided which species lived, which died, and which served. Humanity was classified as docile servants, perfect for mining, construction, and manual labor. Weak, harmless, controllable. The Council made one fatal mistake. They took human children. They thought they understood humanity after centuries of observation. They watched humans submit to alien rule without rebellion. They saw humans accept the lowest positions in galactic society. They witnessed humans endure insults, exploitation, and humiliation with quiet resignation. But the Council never understood the difference between patience and rage. They never learned that humans don't fight for pride or territory or resources. Humans fight for love. And when someone threatens their children, even the most peaceful human becomes something the galaxy has never seen before. The Council is about to learn why Earth was quarantined for millions of years. They're about to discover what their own ancient archives tried to warn them about. They're about to face the species that once made the stars themselves tremble. Because humanity's wrath isn't just coming. It's already here. And this time, no power in the galaxy can stop what they've awakened. Prepare for a journey where the underestimated become unstoppable, where love transforms into fury, and where the galaxy learns that some lines should never be crossed. The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its massive dome displaying the swirling dance of 1,000 star systems. Counselor Zethkar of the Vraxian Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes and gazed upon the holographic displays showing humanity's colonies scattered across the outer rim. The humans had been remarkably compliant for the past 3 centuries, exactly as the psychological profiles predicted. The Human Integration Project proceeds flawlessly, announced Counselor Yerix, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's blue light into dancing rainbows. Labor efficiency in the mining sectors has increased by 37% since we began the enhanced selection protocols. High Counselor Thane, eldest of the Ktharian race, nodded his approval from his elevated platform. His species had ruled the galactic government for over 2 millennia, and their experience with primitive species was unquestionable. The humans continued to prove their designation as Class 5 serval species was accurate. They adapt well to instruction and show no signs of organized resistance. What about the recent protests on Terra Nova? Asked Counselor Merzelk, his scaled hide glistening with concern. My reports indicate some disturbance regarding the youth selection processes. Zethkar dismissed the concern with a wave of his clawed hand. Minor disruption. A few dozen humans gathered outside the selection centers. They dispersed when our peacekeeping forces arrived. The humans understand that challenging council authority is futile. In the depths of the chamber's archive levels, ancient Keeper Viesthan watched the proceedings through neural link while her tendrils carefully maintained the oldest data cores. As the only surviving member of the predecessor race, she alone remembered the warnings buried in the deepest archives. The files marked with symbols that meant extreme caution and planetary quarantine protocol had been sealed for so long that even the translation matrices had begun to decay. The Council continued their discussion, reviewing quotas and production reports from human colonies. Terra Nova supplied rare crystals essential for faster-than-light communication. New Geneva provided agricultural products that fed 12-star systems. Mars Base delivered the skilled technicians who maintained the Council's vast infrastructure. The youth selection program shows exceptional promise, Yerix continued, her voice carrying harmonious overtones that indicated satisfaction. Human children demonstrate remarkable adaptability when removed from family units and placed in specialized training facilities. They learn advanced technical skills faster than any other serval species. This statement caused VES Thuan's ancient neural pathways to surge with alarm. Deep in her memory core, fragmented warnings began to surface. Images of burning worlds, of massive ships emerging from the darkness between stars, of a species that had once made even the predecessors retreat to distant galaxies. How many children have been selected this cycle? High Counselor Thane inquired. Approximately 50,000 across all human settlements, Zethkar replied. We've focused on individuals between ages 8 and 16, as they show optimal neural plasticity for advanced conditioning protocols. VES Thuan's containment pod began trembling as memory fragments aligned. The predecessors had not fled from any external threat. They had fled from Earth, from humanity, from creatures they had mistakenly awakened by threatening something precious to them. On Terra Nova, Sarah Chun stood outside the Central Selection Facility, clutching the identification papers that proved her 10-year-old daughter Emma had been chosen for advanced educational opportunities. The papers used pleasant language about developing young minds and contributing to galactic society, but Sarah knew what they really meant. She would never see her daughter again. Other parents stood nearby, their faces showing the same mixture of grief and helpless rage. The Vraxian guards watched them with casual indifference, their energy weapons clearly visible but unnecessary. Humans didn't fight back. Everyone knew this. Humans accepted their fate. Mrs. Chun, a soft voice spoke behind her. Sarah turned to see Dr. James Morrison, a former Earth history professor who now worked in the Colonial Archives. His eyes held something she hadn't seen before, a dangerous spark of hope. "They took Emma this morning," Sarah whispered. "They said she tested positive for technical aptitude. They said it was an honor." Dr. Morrison moved closer, speaking in low tones that wouldn't carry to the guards. "There are others gathering tonight. People who remember stories from Earth. Stories about who we used to be before the Council found us." Sarah looked confused. "What do you mean? We've always been part of the Council structure. They lifted us from primitive barbarism." "That's what they taught us to believe," Morrison replied quietly. "But I've been researching in the deep archives, finding records they thought were destroyed. Sarah, what if I told you that humans weren't always servants? What if our ancestors were something else entirely?" Around the facility, other quiet conversations were taking place. Parents sharing their grief, workers discussing the increasing frequency of child selections, elderly colonists remembering fragments of old stories that didn't match the official histories. Meanwhile, in the facility's lower levels, Emma Chun sat with dozens of other children in a sterile white room. Vraxian technicians moved between them, attaching neural monitoring devices and speaking in their clicking language. Emma didn't understand the words, but she recognized the tone. They were discussing the children like objects, like tools to be shaped for specific purposes. "Don't be scared," whispered Tom Bradley, a 12-year-old from the agricultural sector. "My older brother went through this program 2 years ago. He says if we cooperate, they treat us well." Emma nodded, but something deep inside her resisted. A voice that seemed to come from genetic memory, telling her that submission was not the human way, that her ancestors had faced worse threats than alien technology and had not merely survived, but conquered. Back in the council chamber, the session was concluding with impressive statistics about human productivity and compliance. No one noticed that ancient keeper VS Thuan had withdrawn deeper into the archives, her neural pathways racing through data cores that hadn't been accessed in millennia. She found it buried beneath layers of bureaucratic files and translation errors, a single line from a predecessor warning beacon. The Terra species must never be provoked beyond their tolerance threshold. When they stop accepting losses and begin counting costs, no force in known space can contain their response. High Counselor Thane adjourned the session with satisfaction. The human problem was completely solved. They had found the perfect servant species, intelligent enough to be useful, emotional enough to control through their attachments to each other, and weak enough to never pose a threat. As the council members departed to their respective worlds, none of them noticed the subtle changes beginning in human settlements across the galaxy. The quiet conversations growing more frequent. The questioning looks directed at council authority figures. The way parents had started holding their remaining children just a little tighter. On Earth itself, in the restricted historical sectors that most humans never visited, automated systems began detecting unusual access patterns. Someone was searching through pre-contact records, looking for files about something called military history and warfare tactics. The systems dutifully logged these searches, but didn't recognize them as significant. In her archive chamber, VES Thuan's ancient consciousness wrestled with a terrible dilemma. She could warn the council about what they were unleashing, but would they believe the fears of an elderly predecessor? She could try to explain that humanity's seeming weakness was actually restraint, that their compliance was really patience, that their acceptance of subjugation was just the calm before a storm that could shatter civilizations. But perhaps it was already too late. The children were taken. The line was crossed. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, something that had slept for 300 years was beginning to stir. Dr. Morrison finished his presentation to the small group of parents gathered in Sarah Chen's living quarters. The historical documents spread across her table told a story the council had tried to erase. Images of human warriors, records of ancient conflicts, evidence of a species that had once fought its way across its own star system before the council found them. "This is who we were," Morrison said quietly, "before they made us forget, before they convinced us we were naturally submissive. We came from a world where survival meant fighting everything from the weather to predators to each other. We didn't evolve to serve. We evolved to endure." Sarah stared at an image of human soldiers from centuries past, their faces showing determination that looked almost alien compared to the resigned acceptance she saw in human faces today. "But we can't fight them. They have technology we can't even understand. Maybe we can't win," Morrison admitted. "But maybe winning isn't the point. Maybe the point is remembering who we are. And maybe, just maybe, reminding them who they decided to push." As the group dispersed into the night, none of them noticed the small maintenance drone recording their conversation from a ventilation duct. The council's monitoring systems were always watching, always listening, always ready to identify potential sources of unrest. But the drone's analysis algorithms, designed to recognize threats from known aggressive species, failed to categorize this gathering as significant. After all, humans were class 5 serval. They didn't rebel. They didn't fight back. They simply accepted their fate and continued working. The algorithms had no category for what humans actually were, a species that had learned to choose their battles very, very carefully. 3 weeks after the children disappeared from Terra Nova, the first signs appeared that something fundamental had shifted in human behavior patterns across the galaxy. Council monitoring stations began registering subtle anomalies that their analytical systems couldn't properly categorize. On New Geneva, construction foreman Marcus Torres received his daily work assignments from Overseer Galactic with the same quiet compliance he had shown for 15 years. The Crothery Overseer barely glanced at the human as he transmitted the coordinates for the day's excavation sites. What Galactic failed to notice was that Marcus no longer looked at the ground when receiving orders. His eyes had started meeting those of his alien supervisors with something that wasn't quite defiance, but wasn't submission either. Marcus gathered his crew of 12 humans outside the facility's main gates. To any observer, it appeared to be a routine work assignment briefing. The aliens saw a group of class 5 servals preparing for another day of manual labor. They didn't see the way Marcus's voice carried new undertones when he spoke. "Today we're excavating Section 7 Alpha," Marcus announced. "Same protocols as always. Stay alert, watch for unstable ground, report any anomalies." He paused, making eye contact with each crew member. "And remember what we discussed yesterday about proper documentation." The crew nodded understanding. Over the past weeks, they had begun keeping detailed records of everything they found during excavations. Not just the rare minerals and artifacts the council wanted, but everything. Especially the items that matched descriptions from the old Earth databases that Dr. Morrison had shared through carefully encrypted communications. Lisa Kowalski, a geologist who had worked the mines for 8 years, approached Marcus privately as the crew prepared their equipment. "I found 3 more items yesterday that match the historical patterns. Metal fragments with composition signatures that don't appear in any council databases." Marcus nodded grimly. The human settlements were discovering that their history ran much deeper than official records indicated. Every excavation was uncovering evidence that humans had been spacefaring long before the council's first contact 3 centuries ago. Evidence that had been systematically buried and forgotten. Meanwhile, in the high-security education facilities where taken children were being processed, young Imogen sat in her assigned study alcove, supposedly learning advanced mathematics. The Vraxian instructors believed she was absorbing the peaceful technical skills that would make her a valuable member of galactic society. They didn't realize she was also learning their language, memorizing their security protocols, and quietly sharing information with other children. Tom Bradley, now her closest ally among the captive children, had discovered that their dormitory's ventilation system connected to maintenance tunnels that ran throughout the facility. More importantly, he had learned that the facility's communication arrays could be accessed from those tunnels. Tonight, when the instructors enter their rest cycle, Emma whispered during their supervised meal period. Section C, ventilation grate. Third, tunnel junction. Tom nodded almost imperceptibly. Around them, 47 other human children continued eating their nutrition supplements and engaging in appropriate educational conversations. None of the monitoring systems detected anything unusual in their behavior. After all, human children were naturally docile and eager to please their instructors. The monitoring systems couldn't recognize the patient, methodical way the children were gathering intelligence about their captors' routines, technology, and weaknesses. They couldn't detect the growing network of communication that was developing between children from different human colonies, sharing information about what they had observed before being taken. On the Council's capital world of Nexus Prime, ancient keeper Viestuin had spent 3 weeks diving deeper into the predecessor archives than she had ventured in centuries. What she discovered made her ancient neural patterns surge with terror and fascination. The humans had not been discovered by the Council 300 years ago. They had been contacted by the Council over 2,000 years ago, during humanity's first expansion into space. The initial contact had gone catastrophically wrong. Her tendrils trembled as she accessed files that detailed the first human war. Images of massive Earth ships emerging from hyperspace without warning. Records of human military units that had fought with a tactical brilliance that impressed even the predecessors. Documentation of victories against Council forces that should have been impossible given the technological disparities. But the most disturbing files dealt with what had ended the war. The humans had not been defeated through superior Council firepower. They had negotiated a ceasefire after receiving assurance that Earth itself would be left untouched. They had agreed to memory modification and cultural restructuring in exchange for the survival of their homeworld. The Council had thought they were gaining a servant species. In reality, they had negotiated a temporary peace treaty with sleeping giants. Viestuin's research was interrupted by an urgent data packet from the monitoring networks. Anomalous behavior patterns were being detected across multiple human settlements. Nothing overtly threatening, just statistical variations in work productivity, communication patterns, and social gathering behaviors. She analyzed the data with growing alarm. The variations weren't random. They followed patterns that matched predecessor psychological profiles of species preparing for coordinated action. The humans weren't just becoming restless. They were organizing. Back on Terra Nova, Sarah Chen's basement had become an informal command center for what the participants carefully never called a resistance movement. Dr. Morrison had established secure communication links with similar groups on 17 other human colonies. They shared information, coordinated research efforts, and slowly built a network of humans who remembered who they had once been. The children are not just taken for education, announced David Park, a former Council communications technician who had access to encrypted transmissions. They're being processed through facilities that match descriptions of military training academies. The Council isn't just taking our children. They're turning them into weapons. Sarah felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. Around the room, other parents showed similar expressions as they processed this information. The careful patience that had defined human behavior for 3 centuries was beginning to crack. There's more, David continued. I've intercepted communications indicating that the youth selection program is expanding. Next phase involves younger children, ages 5 to 8. The Council believes that earlier intervention produces better results. The room fell silent. These were people who had spent their entire lives accepting that resistance was futile, that survival meant cooperation, that fighting back would only bring worse suffering. But the thought of Council technicians processing 5-year-old children through military conditioning programs awakened something that had been sleeping in human genetic memory. Morrison pulled up holographic displays showing the locations of all known child processing facilities. There are 12 major centers within striking distance of our settlements. Each one holds between 2 and 5,000 human children. Striking distance? Sarah asked quietly. James, we're not warriors. We're miners and farmers, and maintenance workers. Morrison's expression showed something the others had never seen before, a cold calculation that belonged to a species that had once fought its way across hostile star systems. We're not warriors yet, but our children are being turned into soldiers whether we act or not. The question is, do we let them be turned into weapons against humanity, or do we remind the galaxy why our ancestors were so dangerous that they needed to be put to sleep? As the meeting continued, none of the participants realized that their transformation was being observed from an unexpected source. In the child processing facility, Emma Chun and her network of fellow captives had successfully accessed the communication arrays and were monitoring the adult conversations taking place across the human colonies. Tom Bradley's technical skills, enhanced by the very training programs designed to make him compliant, had proven remarkably effective at infiltrating Council security systems. "They're waking up," he whispered to Emma as they huddled in the maintenance tunnel, listening to the transmission from Terra Nova. "The adults are finally remembering." Emma nodded, but her expression showed concern rather than relief. "Tom, what if they remember wrong? What if they think this is about fighting for freedom or independence?" "That's not what the old files say." She had spent weeks studying the historical databases that Morrison had shared, but she had focused on different sections than the adults. While they read about military tactics and warrior cultures, she had read about human motivation patterns, about what drove humans to their most extreme actions. "The adults think this is about resistance," Emma continued. "But it's not. It's about protection. Humans don't fight for concepts. They fight for people. And the Council made one mistake. They took us away from the people who would die to protect us." In the processing facility's main control room, Instructor Velkoth reviewed the daily progress reports from the human children with satisfaction. The psychological conditioning was proceeding exactly according to protocol. The subjects showed appropriate deference to authority, excellent technical learning rates, and no signs of rebellion or independent thinking. What Velkoth couldn't detect was that the children had learned to show him exactly what he expected to see while developing their own parallel communication and planning networks. They had become experts at appearing compliant while gathering intelligence about Council operations, security weaknesses, and technological vulnerabilities. More importantly, they were sharing this intelligence with their parents. On Earth itself, in the restricted zones that most humans were forbidden to enter, automated defense systems began registering subtle anomalies. Deep-buried installations that had been dormant for centuries were showing minimal power signatures. Archive systems were being accessed by users with authorization codes that shouldn't exist anymore. Someone was waking up the old databases. Someone was looking for information about weapons systems, ship designs, and military protocols that predated the Council's contact with humanity. The systems logged these activities, but didn't classify them as threats. After all, humans were incapable of challenging Council authority. As the week progressed, Council monitoring stations across the galaxy registered increasing numbers of minor anomalies in human behavior patterns. Productivity remained stable, but communication between settlements had increased. Work crews were spending more time in discussion groups. Archive access had spiked dramatically. Most significantly, psychological stress indicators among human populations were decreasing rather than increasing, despite the expanded child selection programs. This contradicted every model the Council had developed about human emotional responses to family separation. The Council's experts interpreted this as evidence that humans were finally accepting their proper role in galactic society. They didn't recognize it as the calm that preceded storms capable of reshaping star systems. In her archive chamber, V.S. Thwin made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. She began preparing a comprehensive data package about humanity's true nature and the likely consequences of the current policies. She would present it to the full Council, regardless of whether they would believe the warnings of an ancient predecessor. But, as she worked, she couldn't escape the feeling that it was already too late. The humans had crossed some invisible threshold. Their patience had limits, and those limits had been reached. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, in facilities that the Council had forgotten existed, old systems were beginning to respond to signals they hadn't received in 300 years. Signals that meant the time for sleeping was over. The emergency Council session convened at dawn on Nexus Prime, its massive chambers filled with representatives from every major galactic civilization. Ancient Keeper Vestuin stood before the assembled delegates, her weathered form trembling with the weight of revelations that had taken her weeks to fully comprehend. "Honored counselors," she began, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke of vast age and terrible knowledge. "I come before you with warnings from the deepest archives of the predecessor civilization. Warnings about the species we have designated as Class 5 Serval. Warnings that we have ignored for too long." High Counselor Thane shifted uncomfortably on his elevated platform. "Ancient Keeper, with respect, the human situation is completely under control. Our latest reports show increased compliance and productivity across all settlements." VES Thuin's tendrils rippled with agitation as she activated the chamber's central holographic display. Images filled the space above the delegates. Records from the First Human War, tactical analyses from predecessor military archives, psychological profiles that painted a picture of humanity radically different from current council assessments. "The humans are not naturally servile," VES Thuin declared. "They are a species that chose subjugation to preserve something more important than their freedom. They are warriors who agreed to sleep rather than watch their homeworld burn." Counselor Zethkar's clawed hands gestured dismissively. "These are ancient records from a time when our understanding of human psychology was primitive. 3 centuries of observation have proven that humans are fundamentally non-aggressive. They have never mounted organized resistance to council authority. Because they believe their compliance protected their children," VES Thuin replied, her voice carrying undertones of impending doom. "But now we have taken their children. We have crossed the line that their entire civilization agreed to respect." The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates debated the credibility of prehistoric warnings versus contemporary evidence. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the reality that VES Thuin feared was already beginning to manifest. On New Geneva, construction foreman Marcus Torres stood in what appeared to be a routine safety briefing with his excavation crew. To any observer, it looked like standard protocol discussion. The Crothery supervisors paid no attention to the group of humans gathered around their mining equipment. They failed to notice that the equipment had been subtly modified over the past weeks. That mining charges had been reconfigured for different purposes. That communication devices had been upgraded with components that shouldn't exist in human settlements. Section 7 Alpha excavation proceeds on schedule, Marcus reported to his crew. "However, we've detected some unusual geological formations that require specialized handling." Lisa Kowalski nodded understanding. She had spent the morning analyzing mineral samples that contained trace elements matching exactly the explosive compounds described in the old Earth military databases. "The formations are definitely artificial," she confirmed. "Buried approximately 200 years ago, consistent with Council expansion period timeline. What they had discovered was a cache of pre-contact human military equipment, hidden during the original surrender negotiations. Similar caches were being uncovered on 17 other human worlds, each one containing technology that the Council had believed to be destroyed centuries ago." Marcus made eye contact with each crew member. "Remember, proper documentation is essential. Every component must be cataloged according to original specifications." The crew dispersed to their assigned tasks, but their movements showed coordination that went far beyond routine excavation work. They were recovering weapons, vehicles, and communication equipment that represented humanity's pre-contact military technology. Technology that might be primitive by current Council standards, but was designed by humans for humans to use. In the child processing facility, Emma Chun and Tom Bradley had expanded their intelligence network to include over 200 human children across 12 different facilities. Their access to Council communication systems had revealed information that even their parents didn't know. "The expansion isn't random," Emma whispered to Tom as they met in their usual maintenance tunnel location. "They're specifically targeting children from families with technical skills. Engineering, computer systems, weapons maintenance." Tom nodded grimly. His own analysis of the selection criteria had revealed patterns that painted a disturbing picture. They're not just taking children for general conditioning. They're building specialized units. The Council is preparing for something they expect to be difficult. "What could be difficult for them?" Emma asked. "They control the entire galaxy." Tom's expression showed the kind of calculation that would have terrified the Vraxian instructors if they could have seen it. Maybe they know something's coming. Maybe they've realized that taking human children was a mistake. Their conversation was interrupted by an encrypted transmission from the adult networks. Dr. Morrison's voice carried new urgency as he shared intelligence gathered from multiple human settlements. The caches are confirmed on 23 worlds, Morrison reported. We've recovered approximately 60% of pre-contact military hardware. More importantly, we've re-established contact with the automated systems on Earth. Emma's eyes widened. Earth had been declared off-limits to human settlement for 3 centuries, maintained only by automated systems that prevented both human and alien access. But if the adult humans had somehow reactivated those systems, the Earth archives contain complete records of our original military capabilities, Morrison continued. Ship designs, weapon specifications, tactical doctrines, and strategic plans that were developed specifically for fighting the Council. Our ancestors didn't just surrender. They prepared for the possibility that the peace agreement might not hold. As the transmission ended, Emma realized that the adults had been thinking too small. They were planning resistance operations focused on freeing the children and establishing human independence. But the Earth archives suggested that their ancestors had been planning for something much larger. On Nexus Prime, the emergency council session had devolved into heated arguments between those who believed V.S. Thuan's warnings and those who insisted that human compliance proved their harmless nature. The debate was interrupted by urgent reports from monitoring stations across the galaxy. Counselors, announced Communications Director Felnix, his voice tight with concern. We're receiving anomalous signals from the Terra system. Multiple automated installations are showing active status after centuries of dormancy. High Counselor Thane's expression shifted from dismissive confidence to sharp attention. What kind of installations? Unknown, Felnix admitted. The signals are using encryption protocols that our systems cannot decode. More disturbing, the installations appear to be communicating with each other and with locations outside the Terra system. V.S. Thuan's ancient form trembled with vindication and terror. The humans are awakening their sleeping guardians. The installations that protected Earth during the peace negotiations are returning to active status. Impossible, Counselor Zethkar declared. Human technology from 3 centuries ago couldn't threaten current Council capabilities. You're thinking like conquerors, V.S. Thuan replied. The humans were never conquered. They were negotiating from a position of strength when they agreed to the peace terms. They had technology that made even the predecessors cautious. The chamber's displays activated automatically, showing real-time data from Council monitoring networks. Energy signatures were building across the Terra system. Massive structures that had been invisible for centuries were becoming detectable as they powered up from deep standby modes. Meanwhile, in the human settlements, the adult coordination networks received confirmation that their most desperate gamble was paying off. The pre-contact authorization codes that Dr. Morrison had discovered in the Earth archives were being accepted by automated systems that had waited 300 years for their activation. Sarah Chin stood in her basement command center, watching data streams that showed human resistance capabilities growing exponentially as each hour passed. The mining equipment, construction tools, and technical expertise that the Council had encouraged humans to develop were being repurposed with lethal efficiency. Marcus reports that Section 7 Alpha has yielded advanced fabrication equipment, she announced to the gathered coordinators. Lisa's geological surveys have identified 17 additional cache sites within our operational area. David Park, monitoring Council communications, added grimmer news. The child selection program is accelerating. New orders indicate they plan to process children as young as 3 years old. They're not just taking them for training anymore. They're taking them as hostages. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Council had recognized that something was happening in the human settlements. Their response was to take younger and younger children, believing that increasing the threat to human families would restore compliance. They had made the exact mistake that V.S. Thuan's archives warned against. They had escalated rather than de-escalated their pressure on human protective instincts. How long until the Earth systems are fully operational? Sarah asked. Morrison consulted his displays showing connection status with the automated installations. another 18 hours for basic defensive capabilities, 72 hours for full strategic deployment. And how long until the Council realizes what those energy signatures actually represent? Unknown, Morrison admitted. But their monitoring networks are already detecting power buildups that should be impossible for supposedly dead installations. In the child processing facilities, the young humans had reached their own conclusions about the rapidly changing situation. Emma Chun gathered her most trusted allies in the maintenance tunnels and shared the intelligence they had gathered about Council military preparations. "They're not just training us," she explained quietly. "They're preparing to use us as shields. When the adults make their move, the Council plans to put human children in the front lines to prevent our own people from attacking them." Tom Bradley's face showed the kind of cold rage that belonged to a species that had learned to fight across star systems. "Then, we need to make sure they don't get the chance. We need to be ready to act when the time comes." "Act how?" asked Maria Santos, a 14-year-old whose technical skills had impressed even their Vraxian instructors. Emma's expression showed calculation that would have terrified the aliens who thought they understood human psychology. "We've been learning their technology for weeks. We know their security systems, their communication networks, their facility layouts. We know exactly how to disable everything when the signal comes." As the night cycle began across the galaxy, 3 separate groups of humans were preparing for actions that would shatter the Council's understanding of galactic power structures. The adults were awakening military capabilities that had slept for centuries. The children were preparing to seize control of the facilities that held them. And, on Earth, automated systems were beginning to implement strategic plans developed by humans who had anticipated this exact scenario 300 years ago. In her archive chamber, VES Thuan made one final attempt to prevent catastrophe. She composed urgent warnings to every Council member, explaining in precise detail what humanity was capable of when their protective instincts were fully activated. But, as she worked, she realized that the point of no return had already passed. The humans weren't planning resistance or rebellion. They were preparing for war. And, this time, they weren't fighting for freedom or independence. They were fighting to get their children back. The transformation began at 0400 hours, Galactic Standard Time, when the first Earth installation came fully online after 3 centuries of dormancy. The energy signature registered across Council monitoring networks as a massive gravitational anomaly, causing emergency alerts to cascade through command centers from Nexus Prime to the Outer Rim territories. High Counselor Thane stood in the Council's Strategic Operations Center, staring at displays that showed impossible readings from the Terra system. What had appeared to be dead space around humanity's homeworld was revealing itself to be one of the most heavily fortified positions in the galaxy. "Stealth installations," reported Military Coordinator Jex Than, his voice tight with disbelief. "We count at least 40 major defensive platforms that have been invisible to our sensors for centuries. They're using technology that predates our current detection capabilities." "How is that possible?" Thane demanded. "Our archaeological surveys of the Terra system showed only primitive industrial development." Ancient Keeper VES Thuan, now accepted as the Council's primary expert on human capabilities, projected her analysis onto the main display. The humans never dismantled their defenses. They simply made them invisible. These installations were constructed during their expansion period, designed specifically to counter Council military doctrine. The implications were staggering. For 300 years, the Council had believed they were monitoring a pacified species on a defenseless world. In reality, they had been under observation by a civilization that had chosen to remain hidden rather than destroyed. Meanwhile, across 23 human settlements, the coordination networks activated simultaneously. What began as routine morning work shifts transformed into precisely orchestrated military operations as humans revealed capabilities that had been hidden for generations. On New Geneva, Marcus Torres stood before mining equipment that had been modified far beyond Council recognition. The excavation charges that his crew had been manufacturing were not intended for geological purposes. The communication arrays they had installed were not for coordinating work assignments. The vehicles they had been maintaining were not designed for construction projects. "All teams report ready status," Marcus announced to his crew, his voice carrying authority that belonged to someone with extensive military training. "Remember, Our primary objective is securing the children. Secondary objectives include disabling Council military assets and establishing defensive perimeters around human settlements. Lisa Kowalski confirmed that the cache recoveries had yielded enough weapons and equipment to arm over 3,000 humans across their sector. More importantly, the pre-contact military databases had provided detailed intelligence about Council technology, tactics, and vulnerabilities. The Crothery rely heavily on centralized command structures, she reported. Disrupting their communication networks will degrade their coordination capabilities by approximately 60%. Around the settlement, humans were emerging from buildings carrying equipment that should not have existed. Personal weapons, tactical armor, communication devices, and vehicles that incorporated technology the Council believed had been destroyed centuries ago. But what was most disturbing to the few alien observers who witnessed the transformation was the way the humans moved. These were not panicked civilians attempting desperate resistance. These were trained soldiers executing carefully planned operations with precision that spoke of extensive preparation and military discipline. The same humans who had been mining crystals and maintaining equipment for decades were revealing themselves as members of a warrior culture that had never forgotten how to fight. In the child processing facilities, the transformation was even more dramatic. Emma Chun and her network of allies had spent months learning not just Council technology, but Council psychology. They understood exactly how their captors would respond to different types of threats. At exactly 0400 hours, every human child in every facility across the galaxy acted simultaneously. The coordinated operation was not a simple escape attempt. It was a military takeover executed by individuals that the Council had foolishly underestimated. Tom Bradley disabled the primary security systems in his facility, while Emma took control of the communication arrays. Within minutes, over 5,000 human children had seized control of 12 major Council installations, capturing weapons, intelligence, and, most importantly, detailed information about Council military capabilities. All facilities secured, Emma reported to the Adult Coordination Networks. We have confirmed intelligence about Council fleet deployments, strategic plans, and response protocols. Uploading data to shared archives now. What the adult humans discovered from their children's intelligence gathering was that the Council had been preparing for this possibility. They had recognized the anomalies in human behavior patterns and had been quietly mobilizing military forces to deal with what they expected to be localized resistance. But the Council's preparations were based on their assumption that humans would fight like other serval species, with desperation and chaos rather than coordination and strategy. They had not anticipated that humanity possessed military doctrines specifically designed to counter superior technological forces. Dr. Morrison, now revealed as Colonel Morrison of the Earth Defense Command, coordinated the global human response from his command center on Terra Nova. The quiet professor had been maintaining his cover for 30 years, monitoring Council activities and preparing for the day when humanity would reclaim its children. Phase 1 complete, he announced to the network coordinators. All human settlements report successful capture of local Council installations. Phase 2 initiating now. Phase 2 was something the Council had never imagined possible. The human settlements weren't just defending themselves or attempting escape. They were going on the offensive. Human ships that had been disguised as cargo vessels revealed weapon systems and advanced propulsion capabilities. Mining platforms transformed into mobile battle stations. Construction equipment became siege weapons capable of breaching Council defensive installations. But the most shocking revelation was the coordination between human forces. Settlements separated by dozens of light years were acting with perfect synchronization, sharing intelligence, and coordinating attacks as if they were all part of a single military command structure. Because they were. On Earth, in command centers that had been hidden beneath the planet's surface for 3 centuries, the full scope of human preparation was finally revealed. The automated systems that had maintained the planet were not simply caretaking installations. They were the central coordination hub for a military network that spanned the entire galaxy. Every human settlement had been secretly connected to Earth's strategic command systems. Every human worker had been a potential soldier in a war that their civilization had been planning for 300 years. The Council hadn't been governing a servant species. They had been unknowingly hosting the largest military intelligence operation in galactic history. Admiral Sarah Chun, formerly a simple mining administrator, stood in the Earth Command Center she had never expected to see, watching displays that showed the real-time status of human military operations across known space. The same woman who had grieved for her taken daughter was now coordinating the largest military operation in galactic history. Council fleet movements confirmed they're responding exactly as predicted, she reported to the assembled human commanders. They're concentrating forces to crush what they believe are isolated resistance cells. They have no idea they're walking into prepared kill zones. The Council's military doctrine was based on overwhelming technological superiority and rapid response to localized threats. Their fleets were designed to quickly deploy superior firepower to crush resistance before it could spread. Against most species, this approach was devastatingly effective. Against humans, it was a fatal mistake. Humanity had spent centuries studying Council military capabilities, developing countermeasures, and preparing for a war they hoped would never come. But when it finally began, they were ready. Council fleets arriving at human settlements found themselves facing not desperate civilians, but coordinated military forces using tactics specifically designed to neutralize Council technological advantages. Human forces engaged in hit-and-run attacks that exploited Council fleet coordination weaknesses. They targeted command vessels to disrupt enemy communications. They used captured Council technology against its original designers. Most importantly, they fought with the kind of determined precision that belonged to a species fighting for their children's lives. High Counselor Thane watched the tactical displays in the Council Command Center with growing horror. What had begun as routine suppression of human unrest was rapidly becoming the largest military disaster in Council history. Human forces were not just resisting, they were winning. "How many facilities have we lost contact with?" he asked Military Coordinator Jex then. 17 major installations in the first wave, Jex then replied grimly. But that's not the worst part. The humans aren't just capturing our facilities. They're learning from them. Every installation they take makes their next attack more effective. What about the children? Are they using them as human shields? No, sir. The children have taken control of their processing facilities and are actively supporting the adult human operations. They're providing intelligence, technical support, and coordination that suggests extensive preparation. Thane realized with growing dread that the Council had completely misunderstood the situation. They hadn't taken human children as hostages. They had kidnapped the children of a warrior species and turned them into trained military assets. Assets that were now being used against their captors with devastating effectiveness. "Sir," Communications Director Felnix interrupted urgently. "We're receiving a transmission from the Terra system. It's directed specifically to you, using diplomatic protocols that haven't been used for over 2 millennia. The main display activated to show a human face that radiated the kind of cold authority that belonged to someone accustomed to making decisions about life and death on a galactic scale. Behind him, Thane could see command centers filled with advanced military equipment and personnel who moved with the precision of professional soldiers. "I am Admiral Marcus Thompson, Supreme Commander of Earth Defense Forces," the human announced. "I am hereby informing the Galactic Council that the peace treaty established 3 centuries ago has been declared void due to your violation of its primary clause, the protection of human children." Thane found his voice with difficulty. "Admiral Thompson, surely we can resolve this situation through negotiation. The Council is prepared to discuss modifications to current policies." Thompson's expression showed no emotion whatsoever. "High Counselor, you have taken our children and attempted to turn them into weapons. You have violated the most fundamental protection that our species recognizes. There will be no negotiation." "Then, what do you want?" "We want our children back. All of them. Immediately. And we want the unconditional withdrawal of Council forces from every human settlement in the galaxy." Thane struggled to comprehend the scale of what the human was demanding. "That's impossible. The Council cannot simply abandon its authority over entire star systems." Thompson's smile held no warmth whatsoever. "High Counselor, you seem to be operating under the mistaken impression that you have a choice in this matter. Let me clarify the situation for you. The display changed to show tactical information that made Thane's blood freeze. The Terra system wasn't just defended. It was a massive military complex capable of projecting force across the entire galaxy. Fleets that the Council hadn't known existed were emerging from hidden bases throughout human space. You see, Thompson continued, when we agreed to your peace treaty 3 centuries ago, we didn't disarm. We simply went to sleep. Now you've awakened us, and we're very disappointed in what we've found. As the transmission ended, Thane realized that the Council faced a choice between immediate surrender or a war against an enemy they had never understood. An enemy that had spent 3 centuries preparing for this exact moment. An enemy that was fighting to protect their children, which meant they would accept no outcome except total victory. The Battle of Nexus Prime began 72 hours after Admiral Thompson's ultimatum, when the first human fleet emerged from hyperspace in formation that defied every tactical doctrine the Council had ever encountered. What appeared on their sensors was not a traditional military assault, but something far more terrifying. A coordinated operation executed with the precision of a species that had been planning this moment for 3 centuries. High Counselor Thane stood in the Council's war room, watching displays that showed the impossible. Human ships were appearing throughout Council space simultaneously, not randomly, but in carefully coordinated strikes that targeted specific strategic objectives with surgical precision. They're not attacking our worlds, Military Coordinator Jex then reported with confusion and growing dread. They're specifically targeting only facilities that house human children and military installations that could threaten human settlements. What about our defensive fleets? Thane demanded. Engaged and losing, Jex then admitted reluctantly. The humans are using tactics we've never seen before. They're not trying to destroy our ships. They're disabling them and taking prisoners. It's like they want to minimize casualties while maximizing their capture of Council personnel. Ancient Keeper vs. Thuan observed the tactical displays with grim understanding. The humans weren't conducting a war of conquest or revenge. They were conducting a rescue operation on a galactic scale. Every move was calculated to retrieve their children while establishing conditions that would prevent future threats to human families. They're not fighting to win territory, she explained to the Council leadership. They're fighting to ensure this never happens again. They want their children back, and they want guarantees that no one will ever threaten human families in the future. On the flagship of the human assault fleet, Admiral Sarah Chun coordinated the operation to liberate the child processing facilities with the methodical efficiency of someone who understood that every minute of delay meant continued suffering for captured children. The same woman who had once stood helplessly outside a Council facility was now commanding the largest rescue operation in galactic history. Facility 7 reports successful breach, announced Commander Torres, whose mining crew had proven remarkably effective at siege warfare. 2,300 children secured, no casualties. Council personnel are requesting surrender terms. Facility 12 confirms liberation, added Dr. Morrison, now revealed as one of Earth's most experienced military strategists. Emma Chin's intelligence about internal security systems was completely accurate. The children had already disabled most defensive measures before our forces arrived. Sarah allowed herself a moment of fierce pride. The human children who had been taken to be turned into weapons had instead become the key intelligence assets that made their liberation possible. They had used their captors' own training against them with devastating effectiveness. All children are to be evacuated to secure locations immediately, Sarah commanded. Medical teams are standing by for psychological evaluation and treatment. These children have been through trauma that we're only beginning to understand. But as medical teams began processing the liberated children, they discovered something unexpected. Rather than the broken, conditioned servants the Council had intended to create, they found young people who had used their captivity to gain expertise in Council technology and tactics. The children emerged from their facilities not as victims, but as intelligence assets who understood their captors better than anyone. Emma Chun, now revealed as one of the operation's primary intelligence coordinators, reported to the adult command structure with information that would reshape the final phase of the war. The Council's response patterns indicate they're preparing for a negotiated settlement, she announced to the assembled commanders. But Their private communications suggest they plan to resume child selection programs as soon as they believe human military readiness has decreased. Tom Bradley, whose technical skills had proven invaluable in coordinating the facility takeovers, added tactical intelligence that changed everything. More importantly, we've discovered that the Council has been planning this expansion for decades. Human children weren't just convenient resources. We were specifically targeted because our psychological profiles made us ideal candidates for military conditioning. The implications were staggering. The Council hadn't stumbled into conflict with humanity through cultural misunderstanding. They had deliberately chosen to weaponize human children because they recognized that human protective instincts would make their own offspring into perfect soldiers. They had not merely crossed a line. They had calculated exactly where that line was and had chosen to cross it anyway. Admiral Thompson, coordinating the overall strategic operation from Earth's command center, made the decision that would determine the war's outcome. The Council had made it clear that they viewed human children as resources to be exploited. Any peace agreement that left them with the capability to repeat their actions would simply delay the next crisis. All fleet commanders, new operational parameters, Thompson announced across the human military network. We are no longer conducting a limited rescue operation. We are implementing permanent solution protocols. The change in human tactics was immediate and devastating. Instead of precise strikes to retrieve children and establish defensive perimeters, human forces began systematic operations to disable the Council's ability to project force beyond their core worlds. Military installations were captured rather than bypassed. Fleet bases were occupied rather than neutralized. Command and control centers were taken intact, along with their personnel and intelligence archives. The Council found itself fighting an enemy that had escalated from rescue operations to something approaching total war, but with surgical precision that spoke of extensive planning and preparation. High Counselor Thane received reports that painted an increasingly desperate picture. Human forces had captured 37 major military installations, disabled or captured over 200 Council warships, and established permanent occupation zones around every human settlement in the galaxy. They're not trying to destroy the Council, Military Coordinator Jex then reported. They're systematically dismantling our ability to threaten them ever again. It's like they've been planning this reorganization of galactic power structures for centuries. Because they had. Ancient Keeper VS Thuan accessed her deepest archive files and found the truth that explained humanity's current actions. The original peace treaty 3 centuries ago had not been a surrender agreement. It had been a temporary ceasefire negotiated by humans who understood that they lacked the sustained resources to maintain permanent control over the galaxy. The humans had agreed to cultural modification and apparent subjugation in exchange for time to develop the infrastructure necessary for a permanent solution to the threat posed by the Council's aggressive expansion policies. They had spent 300 years building hidden military capabilities while studying their enemies and waiting for the inevitable moment when conflict would resume. The Council had provided that moment by threatening human children. As the war entered its final phase, Council resistance collapsed with shocking rapidity. Not because human forces were overwhelmingly powerful, but because they had demonstrated something far more dangerous than superior firepower. They had shown the ability to learn, adapt, and plan across centuries. Other species within the Council's sphere of influence began questioning whether an organization that could be so completely outmaneuvered by a supposedly primitive servant species was competent to govern galactic affairs. Worlds that had accepted Council authority for millennia began declaring neutrality or actively supporting human demands. The final negotiations took place on Nexus Prime, with Admiral Thompson and his command staff meeting with what remained of the Council leadership. But these were not surrender negotiations. They were discussions about the fundamental reorganization of galactic governance. The Council system has proven itself incapable of protecting the basic rights of sentient beings, Thompson announced to the assembled delegates. We are therefore implementing new administrative protocols that will ensure such violations cannot occur again. High Counselor Thane struggled to comprehend how completely the balance of power had shifted. Admiral Thompson, surely you don't intend to replace the entire governmental structure of the galaxy. Not replace, Thompson corrected. Restructure. The Council will continue to exist, but with new oversight mechanisms that prevent the exploitation of any species' children. Human forces will maintain peacekeeping responsibilities to ensure compliance. What emerged from the negotiations was something unprecedented in galactic history. A governmental system based not on technological superiority or military conquest, but on the principle that certain actions, particularly those threatening children, were absolutely unacceptable regardless of political or military considerations. The new Galactic Charter included provisions that any species attempting to weaponize another species' children would face immediate intervention by human peacekeeping forces. The Council retained authority over trade, resource allocation, and most governmental functions, but lost the ability to implement policies that threatened family structures. Emma Chun, now 18 and serving as a liaison between the human military and the Reformed Council, stood in the same chambers where her captivity had been planned. Her presence served as a reminder to every council member of what happened when someone made the mistake of threatening human children. The new oversight protocols are functioning effectively, she reported to Admiral Thompson. Council members have demonstrated genuine understanding that certain lines cannot be crossed without consequences. Sarah Chun, now serving as Administrator of Human Affairs for the Reformed Galactic Government, watched her daughter with pride that was mixed with sadness for the childhood that had been stolen from her. But Emma had emerged from her experiences stronger and more capable than anyone could have imagined. "Do you think the peace will hold?" Sarah asked her daughter. Emma considered the question with the analytical skills that had helped coordinate one of the most successful military operations in galactic history. The Council understands now that humans aren't naturally submissive. We're naturally protective. As long as they remember that protecting our children is more important to us than anything else they might threaten us with, there won't be any problems. In the depths of Nexus Prime's archives, ancient keeper Viesthuin made final entries in the historical records about the species that had reshaped galactic civilization. The humans had achieved something that even the predecessors had never accomplished. They had created a governmental system based on protecting rather than exploiting the vulnerable. But, more importantly, they had demonstrated that some motivations, particularly the drive to protect one's children, could overcome any technological disadvantage and reshape the balance of power across entire civilizations. The galaxy had learned a lesson that would not be forgotten. There were forces more powerful than advanced technology or superior numbers. And when someone threatened the children of a species that had evolved to fight across hostile star systems, they would discover exactly what those forces looked like. The stars themselves would remember what happened when Earth's wrath was finally unleashed. And no one would ever make the mistake of threatening human children again.